Good evening, and thank you for joining us. This program is being recorded midday on Thursday, and you are viewing it, at least for the first time, on Tuesday evening at 8:30. And as you watch this program, probably in a little while, you may turn on the radio and you'll find out the results of the elections that are being held today. So George Thabault, who is joining us again, who is my assistant, suggested that we should speculate on what the election results will be. We should say, okay, we are predicting 5 days before the election, and then you could look at the newspaper tomorrow and see if we are right. But we're not going to do that. It's hard. I'm always very conservative when it comes to elections, and just have to work as hard as we can to the last moment. And I don't think predictions are what's important. What's important is what happens on election day. But you out there will be knowing the results, already know the results, and we don't. So we're working hard to elect our candidates. And I think as people know, this election is very important. There are a number of aldermanic seats that are coming up between the progressives and the independents, who I am supporting very strongly, and Democrats and Republicans who are opposing us in a number of wards. And we will see what happens. We'll see what happens to the child care charter change, which is on the ballot, as well as 11 other important ballot issues. Also, of course, the results will be coming in today on the presidential election. And while I don't want to go out on a limb, I'm not going to go out on a limb, but George and I were in the car and we were talking about this a little while ago. I think Jesse Jackson will do better than most people think. He did very well a few days ago in Minnesota. The press didn't really give him, I think, the coverage that was due, but he got, I think, 20% of the vote in Minnesota, coming in second to the caucus, beating Simon, Gore, Gephardt, beat them pretty badly, which is, I think, a major breakthrough for him, considering the fact also that Minnesota is mostly a white state. And I think he's going to surprise people here in the state of Vermont. And while I think Dukakis will probably win, I think that Jackson has a good chance to come in second and do reasonably well. All right, George, what are your predictions?
Well, Brian, I don't want to predict right at the moment, maybe at the end of the show, but I wanted to say that earlier, the press conference today, you were mentioning that of all the aldermanic elections since you've been mayor, since 7 years, this has been about the quietest one. And perhaps we can reflect on that a little bit, because I've noticed it too in working in the off hours for different candidates on different issues. Kind of a quieter aspect to everything. I think candidates are not spending as much money as in the past. They're not advertising, and more of a door-to-door type of campaign this time around. I
think so, and to be very honest with you, and not from a partisan point of view, but from my own deep feelings about politics, I'm not sure that that's good. One of the major problems, and I was just up in St. Albans a little while ago talking to some people up there, a real problem that exists in our state, and certainly exists throughout this country, is that large numbers of people really have given up on the political process, do not debate politics, don't really know how their views contrast with somebody else's views. And one of the things that's happened in Burlington, I think, at least since I've been mayor, is that there has been a sharpening of the differences of opinion. And some people think that that's terrible. Some people think, oh, isn't it terrible that they're arguing all the time? I don't. I think that that's what democratic society is about. And while we certainly disagree, I certainly disagree, sometimes very, very strongly, with Democrats and Republicans on the Board of Aldermen or not on the Board of Aldermen, there's nothing wrong with that, and they disagree with me. I think that's how the people learn what the issues are and how this city should go forward and how the state should go forward. And in fact, I was in St. Albans earlier today, and the guy up there was saying that there's not a whole lot. The mayor there is running without opposition. It's never my luck that I never have any opposition. I always have a million candidates. But up there's no opposition. I was in Rutland the other day. They have 4 seats that are coming up on their school board, all without opposition. There was an article in the paper, I think earlier this week, Champlain Valley Union School District in Heinsberg and the neighboring towns had an election on their school budget, which was over $5 million. 1% of the people came out to the meeting. 99% of the people stayed home. Why don't people participate? Why on election day today, Tuesday the 1st, will probably 2/3 of the people in the state of Vermont not vote? Now that to me is frankly more important than who wins. Because the winner today, Tuesday, election day, will be, I don't care who wins. Doesn't matter to me who wins. That will carry overwhelmingly. And whether it's Dukakis or Jackson or this candidate for Board of Alderman or that candidate, they're going to be in the minority. George, why is it, in your judgment, that most people seem to not care?
About running or about voting? I think there's a couple issues, and I was noticing on that same line up in the newspaper that serves the Jericho area that the town of Jericho was kind of begging for somebody to run for town selectman. There was an open position, but nobody had put their name in, and they felt that you could get your name in, and if you got 1% of the vote, you would be elected. You had need to get a minimum of 30 votes.
That's it.
In Jericho. They felt that, and if no one runs, then the other two selectmen will, by law, be able to appoint somebody from the community to take that seat. And I think part of the reason I think in smaller towns is that you have, there's no compensation. Not that there's much here, but there's the tax revenues are pretty much the property tax, and the school budget basically absorbs the largest share of the tax dollar in any one town. So the selectmen have less decisions to make, and a lot of the school budgets are 80 to 90% salary. So it's very difficult to bring ideas forward and have the resources to do it. And in some ways, I think there's less decisions to make, maybe in local government, than people feel there are.
See, I don't agree. I mean, I think you're half right. But there's another half also. It would seem to me that there are a few areas that are more important than helping to determine the quality of the education that our children are going to get. And school boards can really influence that. I think one of the problems, and I want to reiterate what we're discussing right here, the media plays enormous attention that candidate X beats candidate Y. I think the more important issue is that the vast majority of the people don't participate in the process, choose not to involve themselves, certainly don't run for office. And if we want to protect democracy in general, and especially local democracy, we've got to figure out why that's so. Why some towns can't even get candidates to run for Board of Selectmen or for the school board. I'll tell you what I think. I think that people don't realize the potential that local government, or in fact even state government, has to change our lives. I think there's a general feeling out there that it doesn't matter who gets elected. My electric bill is going to go up, my telephone bill is going to go up, it's not going to affect my job situation, kids going to go to school, it doesn't matter all that much. And the reason for that is that to a large degree, real power in this country does not rest with government. It rests with private corporations who exert enormous influence on our lives, and government really doesn't have much to say about that. And one of the issues that was on the ballot today, which to me was very important, was this concept of home rule. And the reason that it was important, and I don't know how many people know what we mean when we talk about home rule means that everything being equal, the local government and the people of a given town or city should have the right to determine the future of their city in ways that make sense to them, that are obviously constitutional and not in violation of state law. And the reason that I feel strongly about that is that you're not going to be able to get people involved in local government if every time they do something that makes sense to them, state government or the state legislature says, no, you can't do it. Let me give you some examples about that. In Burlington, we don't like the winter-summer electric rate differential. Our people don't like it. We took the question to the people, and the people said, we want to do away with it because we think it's unfair. We voted for it. We took it down to the state legislature. The state legislature said, no, you're forced to stay with it even though you own your own electric company. And there's the irony. You know, those of us who believe in public power, we believe in public power because we think the people themselves should have the right to make decisions regarding their own electric companies rather than, say, a Green Mountain Power situation or Central Vermont, where that's a board of trustees, a board of directors of stockholders, basically representing stockholders who make those decisions. Yet here we have a municipally owned light department. Our own people want to go forward. Our own light department wants to go forward in a certain direction. they're not able to do it. Several years ago, we hired a consultant who restructured the rate schedule for the electric light department and basically came forward with what he believed and what I believed and what the Board of Aldermen believed and what the Board of Electric Commissioners believed was a fairer rate design, which essentially would have raised rates for large users of electricity and lowered rates for the residential homeowners. In fact, this was several years ago, we would have been able to lower electric rates for homeowners by 27%. Took it to Montpelier, Public Service Board said, no, you can't do it. Vermont State Legislature got involved in another way, said you can't do it. We've come forward with property tax alternatives, which would have substantially lowered property taxes or stabilized property taxes in Burlington. Montpelier said you can't do it. And I think what happens, and it happens more so outside of Burlington, is that people say, hey, what's going to happen? They're going to raise my taxes anyhow for the schools. What difference does it matter? And I think that unless we give power to the people and say to them, hey, you can make real decisions, people are going to say, hey, doesn't matter. Why should I participate?
It kind of reminds me of this being town meeting day, to the myth of Vermont being the place where town meeting exists, and it's so warm and wonderful. And having grown up in Winooski and Burlington, I only got to participate in a couple of the town meetings when I lived about 10 years ago in a small town outside of Regent. And having grown up in a political family where elections were always discussed and debated, and I was really looking forward to this first real Vermont town meeting, because in Winooski, like in Burlington, people come and vote. They don't sit around and debate and raise their hands and shout and have an energetic discussion, then take a ballot, take a vote. And so I had to stay home from work that day. I took a day off, said I'm going to participate in this town meeting. And what I was struck by, it started at 10 o'clock in the morning, and what I was struck by was the complete lack of discussion of almost any issue at all that occurred. It was about 100 people. Some routine matters came up. The moderator kind of walked through that. There were no controversial spending measures. The two items that got the most discussion were basically the plowing route of the town road commissioner. Some people thought that plowing route was favoring certain people in the little valley, and that should be rotated so other people get plowed out first. And then the other issue was how much money to give. This is actually true. How much money to give to the people that were maintaining the cemetery down in Regent, in terms of a flower donation for that year. And I walked away very disheartened, thinking, boy, is that all there is? And on a local level, I mean, a small town, rural town, where they don't have too many decisions to make, because the state is giving them the money for the education, the state is giving them money for road repair and maintenance, and there's very little else in terms of financial matters to decide or talk about.
I am astounded. I am really astounded to how little real political discussion there is in this country. And I suspect that compared to other industrialized countries in the world, we have less sophisticated political discussion. I don't care what people's point of view is, but let's have a clash of ideas. Let's talk about how we want this country to go forward. And I think to a large degree, and what you're indicating, it often takes place at the local level, certainly on the national level, most of what really politics is about is 30-second TV ads. I mean, the media is preoccupied with how much money candidates are raising for an interesting reason, because with that money, the candidate then buys 30-second ads and tells people all the wonderful things that he or she is going to do in nice, simplistic ways with good music and lovely wives and husbands and children hanging around. And that's really what politics is about. And I have some very strong fears about the future of democracy in our country if we do not, within the schools, outside of the schools, all over the place, start a real debate in this nation as to what's what. And again, I don't mind on our Board of Aldermen, as I said before, sometimes gets criticized. People say, boy, it's such a bitter debate, boy, people are yelling and screaming at each other. Let me tell you, I would rather have it 1,000 times over. People raising their voices and arguing real issues, representing different points of view, than people sitting around not discussing issues and life's going on. Because when that happens, then the real players, the real people who are making the decisions, and let's not kid ourselves, decisions are being made. It's not government representing the people, but it's decisions being made behind closed doors in corporations or the medical center or the university. The big, powerful institutions are making decisions and government is simply acquiescing to those.
Yeah, I think a case, I mean, the clear case of that last point is in Williston, where the Pyramid Corporation, by virtue of their desire to develop a major project in that town, suddenly that becomes the entire issue for anyone in public office in that town. It's basically, you could get elected with a certain agenda, a certain set of ideas you'd like to try to work on, but suddenly there's an application, you know, through the process for a large project, and then that becomes your public life, dealing with something of that size. Your comments also about television, maybe I should throw in a plug for a very interesting book I think you've read by Neil Postman on television, called Amusing Ourselves to Death. And in there he makes a very decent argument why political commercials should be banned from television. And basically, as you point out, he says that what's happening is there's no, because of television, because of the way it presents itself and the speed with which it goes by, there's no time to really say, here's my position on a certain subject, here's why I back this position, here's how I've come to that thinking. So you can only make an emotional type of presentation to the voter with the flags and the patriotic music and this, you know, this aura of strength and what we're seeing on people in New Hampshire saw considerably. So that he was saying that for the political health of the nation, it's dangerous, and if you could muster enough political will in the sense that people could recognize how dangerous this is to democracy, to people taking part in the process, that you should really take them off the air.
You know, it's interesting to me, and you and I talked about this after the New Hampshire primary. Of course, we observed the New Hampshire primary rather intensely because it's a neighboring state. That CBS, I guess all the other networks itself, preempted their regular programming to be at 7 o'clock exactly, to get on the air, national television, to tell us who the winner of the New Hampshire primary was. And they're fixated on getting the word out that the whole world is waiting with bated breath and can't wait till 9 o'clock to find out. But they predicted at 7:01 that George Bush was going to win in New Hampshire. And yet, if you said to CBS, don't you think it might be a good idea to allow the candidates for President of the United States to have primetime air to speak for a half hour to the American people, or an hour, to elaborate what their vision is for this country, they would say, oh my God, we can't do that. People are watching the game shows. And that's interesting, but they're willing to preempt because they want to be first. It's just so terribly important that at 7:01 CBS can get the word out as opposed to 7:03 for NBC. So CBS really told us that George Bush was going to win first. But you know, it's almost a vicious circle. Their response would be, are you kidding? Put George Bush on television at 8 o'clock prime time? Nobody would watch it. Nobody would watch it. People would prefer Miami Vice to George Bush. And I'm using Bush only as one Gephardt, you name them. Okay. And that's the second problem. Why is it true that people could not listen to an hour speech talking about the future of their nation? I am not so sure that people would not watch that. Second of all, to the degree that they won't, it may say something about the candidate's ability to speak to the issues that face the people of America. I think that it is possible for a serious candidate talking about the real issues and the real lives of the people to communicate. But it is interesting that CBS and NBC apparently think that that's not the case. So one will go through an entire campaign without hearing at length on a major national television network what a candidate stands for. You're supposed to say something profound at this point.
What are the opportunities to do things in a small town or in a small city? I mean, you talked about all the things you can't do. Are there things that you can actually do?
Well, sure. And I think that Burlington has shown it. You know, I am called confrontational. Everything that I do, people, my opponents say, God, there's nothing else to do. He wants to get into a fight. That's really not the case. What we have done, what I and the people in the progressive movement have done, have had the courage to go forward in a number of different areas. And when you seriously go forward, trying to fight for the rights of working people, or poor people, or elderly people, by definition, you generate opposition from the ruling class, from the establishment, who wants to put a stop on it. Okay? What have we done in Burlington? You name the issue, and I think we have spoken out on it. And I believe, and I know people disagree with me on this, very often Republicans, Democrats disagree with me on it. I think it is absolutely appropriate for people at town meeting to in fact be debating not only the local issues, which are really the primary items that should be debated. I see no problem with the people at local government level debating national and international issue. I mean, I want to reiterate the point we made earlier. To me, I am astounded by the lack of discussion that takes place in our society, the real serious debate. And I think town meeting, I think the Burlington Board of Aldermen or the Rutland Board of Selectmen are fine places for different opinions and debate to take place so that people get an understanding of what the issues are of the day. So what have we done in Burlington? We do debate the issue of war and peace. This Board of Aldermen has heard many debates on U.S. involvement in Nicaragua. On the ballot that the people are voting on today, have voted on, is an issue dealing with the national health care system. I think we're not going to solve the crisis in health care until we look at a fundamentally different way of allocating health care dollars. I think we should guarantee health care for every American. I think it shouldn't be out of pocket expenses. I think it shouldn't be Blue Cross, Blue Shield, or Connecticut General. Okay, I think you need a national health care system which says that if you're an American, you're going to get all of the health care that you need. Okay, that's the easy part. And everyone can say, well, that's great, that's nice. But B, how do you control the escalating cost of health care? And I think ultimately, the government representing the people. You see, and Ronald Reagan is, oh, government, that's a dirty word, that's terrible. All that the government is the people. And if government is not doing a good job, it's because the people are not standing up and creating good government. I would much rather have the people through their government take a bold step forward on health care rather than the drug companies or the hospitals or the millionaires who basically control the healthcare industry. And that's really what the choice is about. I think we can control the cost of healthcare, but we're going to have to ask some very hard questions. What is the function of the healthcare establishment? Is it to make money for the people who are in that industry, or is it to provide the best care possible at the lowest possible rates? I'm afraid that our system is motivated by people trying to make as much money as they can. But, be that as it may, that's a debate that I am prepared to see happen right here on the Burlington Board of Aldermen. Okay? Let people learn about the health care system. Formulate their opinion. People agree with me, great. If they disagree with me, that's fine. Let's have a debate. Who is the medical establishment? We never hear from these people. How often do we hear from the head of the medical school, a very powerful man? How often is he on television talking about his views as to what role the medical school should be playing in our community? How often is the head of the Medical Center Hospital of Vermont out in our community talking to people about his vision for outreach for the medical center? You know, I can go on and on, whether it's housing, whether it's childcare, whether it's women's rights, whether it's youth programs, whether it's the waterfront. There are a dozen different issues that we are working on, and there's always debate, and that's great. And my concern is that in many communities in this state and throughout the country, there is not debate because government really is not trying to do anything for the people. And people say, hey, it doesn't matter. And ultimately, what they are really saying is that it doesn't matter what the government does because the real power doesn't lie with the government. It lies with the General Electrics or the UVM Board of Trustees and the other people. Now, okay, that's mostly, my view on that.
Bernie, today in town meeting, to direct something to that question, there were 96 towns dealing with the home rule issue. And from having been to a couple of town meetings, one where I believe the freeze vote was voted down. I'm not sure, but I suspect that that issue will lose in some towns in Vermont. And I think one of the reasons is because there won't be enough proponents of it to get up at those town meetings who have had actual experience in really what it means, why it's out there. So I would expect that it would pass in a large majority of towns, but there'll be towns where it'll be defeated. That's one prediction I can make at this point. But now it almost comes from that sense of people not really wanting to tackle those problems or not having the experience of going down to Montpelier with an idea and having it shot down at that point.
I think, to me, there is not, and the reason that we do what we do in Burlington against tremendous opposition, and I know there are people who don't like everything that we do, and the reason that Jesse Jackson is doing what he's doing, which is attempting to bring together a coalition of working people, white and black, of elderly people, of women's group, of environmentalists, of farmers, is that unless ordinary people begin to stand up, they're not going to have any impact on this country. And your multi-millionaires and your multinational corporations are going to dominate our life. And I think, we have had some success in getting people involved in Burlington. I think we've done a good job, probably not as good a job as we can do, and I would like to see us do better in the future. But of all of the exasperations that I have to deal with, it is the fact that I'm just constantly astounded that on major issue after major issue, we could be very successful if people came forward and stood and fought for their rights, and they don't. And I think there's a tremendous feeling of hopelessness and of pessimism out there. And this country clearly is not going to change unless the people become involved. It's just not good enough to sit home watching, the tube for 40 hours a week. You can watch this program, that's all right. And again, I want to point out that I think CCTV and public access television is a very different kind of television because it's a local television dealing with local issues, having local people on. And my hope is that in coming years we're going to see a stronger movement toward public access. But if people aren't prepared to stand up and fight for their rights and elect the leadership that they want and run for office themselves, I think democracy in this country does not have a tremendous future.
Bernie, we have some more time. I don't know if, I wonder if you were talking to, down in Montpelier last week when we went down to Secretary of State Jim Douglas regarding the registration proposals that are in front of the legislature. I didn't catch how they're doing. Maybe you could bring us up to date on that.
We made 3 or 4 proposals to the House Municipal Corporations Committee in terms of suggesting ideas as to how we can significantly improve voter turnout in the state of Vermont. And the ideas were as follows. Number 1, we suggested that not everybody either has the time or the confidence to walk into town meeting, into City Hall or your town hall and go speak to the town clerk and register to vote. There are many people in our state, rather sadly, who are functionally illiterate. There are people who are on welfare. There are people who are on unemployment. There are this, that, and other people who were arrested 20 years ago, and their attitude is, gee, I want to stay away from City Hall. And what we suggested is if you have postcard registration, which exists in most of the states in the country now, where you simply fill out a form, a postcard, self-addressed postcard, goes to the city clerk, you can be registered. And my understanding is, in fact, that that's moving along.
Would that, do you think that'd be passed in time to be in effect for this presidential election in November?
I think if the governor signed it, it should be, yeah. And I don't know if it's going to get through the House. But that's very important. Second of all, we support the concept of same-day registration, where people who are not registered to vote can walk in on election day, present valid ID, and vote. Basically what I am trying to see happen, and other people throughout the country, is we are American citizens. And the system should be built to make it as absolutely as easy as it possibly can be for people to vote. We don't need all these hurdles. There's nothing God-given about closing off voter registration, what is it, 13 days now before?
I think it's 17 days.
17 days before, so somebody wakes up 2 days before and say, oh my goodness, I really want to vote, and the town clerk says, well, you missed the deadline. If you're an American citizen, if you're over 18, you should be able to vote, period. In fact, I would state in North Dakota, to the best of my knowledge, has absolutely no checklists, nothing. People simply walk in, present their ID, and they vote. And they have one of the highest voter turnouts in the country. Voting is a right. It's not a privilege. It's a right of every American citizen, and we should create a system which encourages people to participate as much as possible. So the 2 areas that we specifically recommended is same-day registration, postcard registration. Also, we think that the state should do a far more vigorous outreach effort. There's no reason why there should not be people in every Grand Union, in every Martins, Gaines, registering people to vote. It doesn't cost a lot of money to hire those people, and the state should be doing it, in my view. Political candidates often doing it, but there's no reason why the state should be doing it. So should not be doing it. And in fact, in Burlington, I think after these elections are over, we will be coming up with some ideas as to how we can get people to vote. For example, I don't know why almost automatically every kid that graduates high school, along with his or her diploma, should not be filling out a form to register to vote.
They might be registered. That's what I'm reading is that's the lowest turnout.
Young kids, yeah.
18 to 26 is the lowest turnout in presidential elections of that group. So it's not easy.
Well, while we're on the issue of Montpelier, let me just discuss for Burlingtonians a few other issues that are down there.
How did Jim receive your ideas?
Well, I don't want to talk for another, for a state official. I think Jim Douglas is not unsympathetic to seeing mechanisms developed to increase voter turnout. I think Jim is sincere in that desire. I should also say, though, that there are some public officials, especially on the federal level, who will give lip service to the desire to see people come out and vote, but in fact don't want them to come out to vote. Because I think the truth of the matter is that if working people and poor people, and those are the people who right now are not voting in large numbers, if those people come out and vote, it is not going to be good for people who represent big money interests. That's true. So I think while big money people and the President of the United States will talk about how he wants a lot of people to come out and vote, I don't believe it. I think their feeling is the fewer the people who vote, the better it is. You can spend a lot of money influencing those people. They'll be wealthier people.
The federal group, wasn't it a federal agency that recommended, though, that the Eastern Coast polling places this November be open until 10 o'clock to allow the people on the West Coast to vote without having the results after that. My first recollection was that the state of Vermont, through Jim Douglas, Secretary of State, was opposed to this idea because of the extra time it would put on to town clerks and ballot clerks.
Okay, I don't know what Jim's view is on that, but my view is, and I was just talking actually to the mayor of Rutland the other day, it astounded me when I ran for governor a year and a half ago, and we learned that I was under the assumption here in Burlington the polling places open at 7 a.m. and they close at 7 p.m. And that's okay. I myself think that the polling places should be open even later. Because let's just say somebody works, down in Montpelier and they live in Burlington. They got out of work for whatever reason, they hang out, they get back in their car, they're here at home at 6:30, maybe they want to grab a bite to eat before they come out to vote. And yet if they have a dinner, they're going to miss an election. The most important thing is to get people to vote, not for CBS to get, to know who's going to win at 7 o'clock. So my position, my position is that to as great a degree as possible, voting places should be open as late as possible. But what the mayor of Rutland was saying was that even in Rutland, the second largest city in the state, they open their polls at 10 a.m. in the morning. It is unbelievable. Couldn't believe it. I knew that was true in a number of the smaller towns. It is astounding to me. The average working person is going to get to work at 8 o'clock in the morning. If they have to travel a distance, they leave at 7 o'clock. That means they can't vote in the morning at all. A number of our people vote before they go to work. They stop by the polls. Mm-hmm. So if the polls are open at 10 o'clock, they can't vote in the morning. If they're some distance away, they can't vote in the evening, or it makes it very uncomfortable and difficult. It's absolutely absurd. And the issue here is not what benefits the clerks. It's what benefits the public. And if it costs us a few dollars more to keep the polling places open and we get people to vote, then that's what clearly we have to do. Just I think we're probably running out of time, so let me just touch on a few other issues that are of concern to Burlingtonians down in Montpelier now. Number one, clearly the most important issue for us is the sewer issue that we are working with, and as people I think understand, the city and the Cunin administration struck an agreement on a $52 million package which would enable the city to improve its antiquated sewer system and basically solve once and for all the combined sewer overflow problem, which on occasion results in raw sewage entering our lake. That bill is right now in the House Natural Resources Committee, where it is being debated and analyzed. Then it goes, as I understand it, to the Appropriations Committee, and it's going to travel through the committee process in Montpelier. And we are cautiously optimistic that when the legislature adjourns this session, we are going to have a bill to enable us, not only us, I should point out, the governor correctly expanded that program to cover all towns and cities that are having to cope with a very expensive problem of lake pollution and river pollution. It seems to me that that is certainly one of the major environmental problems that we as a state are going to have to address. And I believe the proposal now is to put in over period of many years, some $80 million into a fund to help communities address that. So I think that's a step forward, and we're making some progress. There is another area where I wish I could report to the people that we were making progress. I think we're not. I think we're probably going to lose. And that gets back to this issue of home rule that George and I were talking about a moment ago. The people of Burlington last year, and I think many of you will remember, voted on a charter change which would essentially wipe out totally property taxes for low-income senior citizens and also provide them with significant rent rebate money. Essentially what we're going to do is tag on local money to the state property tax rebate program and rent relief program. And we were going to get that money by raising the property transfer tax 0.5%, and that's the tax that the state now has on property that is bought and sold within a given town. I testified on that issue before the House Ways and Means Committee a month ago. They have still not reached a decision. I'll be down there again. I feel very strongly that that is the way to go. There is no reason. I've talked to too many elderly people who just cannot afford higher and higher property taxes. People of Burlington voted to do away with property taxes for low-income senior citizens. I'm not, in fact, sure that Montpelier is going to allow us.
Well, on that issue, Bernie, the state, I guess, in the recent news reports, is recommending now that there's been a committee recommendation to raise that property transfer tax 0.5% to fund statewide planning and issues to to deal with growth. So they've kind of said we'll take that 0.5% and still denying Burlington an extra 0.5%.
I mean, it gets back to that point that we started this discussion on, and that is the whole question of respect for local government. The people of Burlington, by a vote of, I believe, 58%, said we want to abolish property taxes for low-income senior citizens. We can do it. It's not a very expensive proposal. And our friends in Montpelier who think they know more about what the people of Burlington want and need than we do are going to say no. And that's what this whole issue of home rule is about. So in any case, the sewer issue is a very important issue. The property tax relief program for senior citizens is a very important issue. Election reform is a very important issue. The other issue that we have spent a great deal of time on has to do with the question of the crisis and the cost of health care. I am very actively supporting two bills, one of which would open up meetings of the Board of Trustees of hospitals all over the state to the public. Right now, as you know, they meet behind closed doors. Rates go up, nobody knows why. Absolutely astounding to me. I testified on that bill last week. There's another bill that Sally Conrad is presenting, which would allow public representation on these boards of trustees, and I think that's important if we're going to try to keep the cost of hospital care down. I think what time is running out. I apologize for my throat and my voice. It's election time, my voice gets hoarse. I do even more talking than usual. Some people will find that hard to believe. Okay, we thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again next week. George, thank you very much for your help.